satellite images captured last year appearing to prove Iranian attempts to conceal its nuclear weapons program. The pictures, taken over several years' time, revealing a site in Sanjarin, Iran, where a nuclear research building and manufacturing plant had been covered up. The plant allegedly used to produce shockwave generators, key components in the miniaturization and detonation of nuclear arms. Meanwhile, Iranian and Western powers continuing nuclear deal negotiations in Vienna, but U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying that in light of Iran's malign activities, some form of sanctions will likely remain in place even after a potential agreement is reached.
We don't know at this stage whether Iran is willing and able to do what it would need to do to come back into compliance. So we'll see if that actually materializes. Even in the event of a return to compliance with the JCPOA, hundreds of sanctions will remain in place, including sanctions imposed by the Trump administration. If they are not inconsistent with the JCPOA, they will remain unless and until Iran's behavior changes.
Joining me now with more is international relations expert at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategic Studies and former head of the Foreign Relations Directorate to the National Security Council in the Prime Minister's office, Micky Aharonson. Micky, thanks so much for being with us again. Now, what sanctions is Blinken talking about? How strong are the sanctions that will likely remain even with the newly signed JCPOA?
Well, it is obvious that the majority of sanctions, the significant sanctions, would be removed if all parties agree to return to the JCPOA. It would be quite insignificant, and when the U.S. is talking about reaching a longer and stronger agreement afterwards, it is quite unclear what are the leverages it would have to do so. The majority of sanctions would not be binding ones.
So when we say that there are hundreds of sanctions, are we talking about hundreds of small, weak sanctions?
There would be sanctions also that were enacted under the Trump administration, but the Iranians would reach the position they're interested in, which is opening their economy, being able to trade, and still being able to continue with their nuclear program. Also, Secretary Blinken said on Monday that the problem that if the Iranians continue to breach the agreement, the breakout time would shrink to weeks. But the problem is that under the JCPOA, breakout time is allowed to shrink to weeks starting from 2023, when the sunset clauses begin to apply. So from 2023 till 2030, it would be legal to enrich uranium, to use advanced centrifuges. And this is exactly why Israel opposed the agreement, because the JCPOA does not solve the question of Iranian nuclear weapons. It only postpones it.
So let's move now to internal Iran. How are Iranian officials, especially presidential candidates ahead of Iran's elections, discussing the sanctions and the JCPOA nuclear deal?
Well, we know that elections are coming. We see that the majority, if not all, candidates are what is considered to be non-moderate ones. Not that I think there are really moderate ones, because the person who decides who will run is the council and the supreme leaders. So to begin with, it's not a question of election, it's a question of selection. And they will all do their best to remove the sanctions as agreed, and it seems to be a done deal. The JCPOA, returning to the JCPOA, seems to be a done deal.
All right, so we're seeing reports now that since the United States is seemingly dead set on returning to a deal, as you're saying as well, Gulf nations like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are returning to talks with Iran of their own. What do you know of these reports and these alleged discussions? And also, do you see a peaceful resolution to the conflicts with Iran taking shape? Or do you think that maybe some of these efforts are just futile with respect to the mullahs and the Ayatollah regime in Tehran?
Well, everybody's trying to hedge their bets, and Gulf states are noticing the American fatigue from the Middle East. They're noticing the fact that the U.S. is interested in focusing elsewhere in its internal problems in Asia, and they're trying to hedge their bets. The Gulf states are not interested in appearing as a serious opposition to the U.S. They are interested in appearing as promoting U.S. interests, which is stabilizing the Middle East and reaching some sort of a stabilization between Sunni nations. There isn't really a Sunni axis, and the Shia axis, and that would promote what they perceive as promote American interests. But there's also difference in the Gulf itself. The UAE agreed to what is called the Gulf Standard, which is not pursuing a nuclear fuel cycle. Saudi Arabia did not agree to that. And everybody's saying, justly so, why not have the same capacities that Iran has that did not agree, of course, to anything like the gold standard.
So it sounds like a policy if Iran has it, then why can't we? Which I think goes against the non-proliferation agreements. But in the meantime, I'm sorry to cut you off, but thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your insights with us, Micky Aharonson.
Thank you.